program is for training purposes in TV news education. Some copyrighted material is used and is credited on screen. However, no more was taken than was necessary to tell the story of the event. YBA claims fair use of materials.
Same time talking about maybe taking kickoffs out of the picture, they haven't really decided yet, it looks like, and they're going to need to make that decision soon.
That's true. They are going to need to make a decision. Right now, I'm going to give it over to Back Talk to have some discussion with you guys. We haven't heard from them so much so far. What's up, Jason?
All right, thank you, TJ and Liam. I'm Jason here with Rylan, who's back after being busy with baseball and other things, as well as Benji. And I wanted to bring up the point that domestic violence, we haven't seen so much within sports, but part of the problem, I think, with this is that and I want to bring in Carter with his thoughts on this as well, that a lot of professional, not just football, but other players, they have guns because they fit to protect themselves, because they think someone who doesn't like them may try to attack them. But the fact is that because they're getting a lot of concussions, they're not thinking as well, and it kind of
makes them want to shoot people.
Right, it disorients their brains and it makes them want to shoot people, and they have suicidal thoughts. There are studies going on, so the guns are actually hurting them more than protecting them more. What do you think about that, Carter?
Well, one interesting thing about that topic about gun control and how that can lead to domestic violence or aid it, the day after the Belcher shootings on Sunday Night Football, Bob Costas gave his halftime commentary, which is one of my favorite things to watch on TV.
Did a great job with
and he talked for his minute and a half about how the Belcher incident shed light on a very serious issue, and that's that not necessarily if you own a gun that's going to lead to domestic violence, but if you have domestic violence and then there's a gun in the picture, there's a potential to make that situation a whole lot worse than it was if there wasn't a firearm. And so in that way, this incident is bringing up a larger issue, and it was obviously very contentious. You know, the people who like football aren't necessarily the people who are in favor of more restrictive gun control, and so that's another thing that's dividing people right now about the NFL.
And where Bob Costas is coming from, I can totally see, and he did talk with, interestingly enough, he went on the O'Reilly Factor and talked with Bill O'Reilly about his stance on gun control. And what Bob Costas said, I can very much agree with. He said that he doesn't think guns should be banned. He thinks that there should be more stringent and less lenient background checks on people who want to own guns. Right now, 40% of guns are owned in the United States with no background checks prior to the purchase, which I think is ridiculous. I think that number should be at 0%. And seeing this happen, it's just going to lead to more bloody and disgusting gun violence that should not be happening.
I agree. If you are going to go out and get something that has the potential to kill another human being, you have to go through some tests, something rigorous. I mean, you have to know that you're not going to misuse something that has such destructive potential, and it prevents instances like the one we saw in Kansas City.
And I totally agree with you too. Definitely think that guns should be legal to have for self-protection, but it has to be more on a personal basis. You know, as you said, you have to have background checks. You'll have to go through tests to make sure that you will be safe with this weapon and that you will not misuse this in a way that might harm someone else.
Absolutely.
And making more background checks for owning guns, that's not infringing on Second Amendment rights. And by the way, when the Second Amendment was created, they did not have Uzis and AK-47s. That argument is ridiculous at this point. And what other people can argue is saying, you know, Siobhan Belcher or anybody could have used, you know, a knife or a rope to strangle them. And you know what? If knife violence and rope violence becomes to a point that it's so high that it's ridiculous, then yeah, we're going to have to regulate knives and ropes. But right now, it's guns that are up
Only
there.
a kitchen knife you have to regulate. You have to go through a background check to buy knives for a kitchen. Like, we have to regulate every weapon eventually. And when this, like you said, when this amendment was created,
yes,
they didn't have like pistols. They just had things to shoot with, and you should be able to own that.
And what Seth Meyers said on Saturday Night Live once, he said, You know, back when the
Most
second
creditable source.
back when the Second Amendment was created, to be bulletproof, you'd have to wear a heavy coat. That's pretty much what weapons were back then. But according to the Government Accountability Office, in the 5 states with the most minimum requirements, federal requirements for owning guns, least background checks, 100% of people who used a fake ID got their weapons. So I think that needs to change drastically. People can't just assume that because there is a Second Amendment in place, they're entitled to owning a gun, even if they are criminals and they are going to do something bad with that gun.
And going back to what you said earlier, TJ, about the knife violence and rope violence, it's a lot harder to stab somebody to death and to strangle somebody to death than it is to just fire off one bullet and kill a person.
Exactly.
And it's much more plausible that a shooting could happen in a fit of rage as opposed to a strangling or a stabbing. And you're absolutely right that the Second Amendment, when it was drafted, things were very different than the way they are now. And it was really the real intention behind it was to guard up a militia to protect a neighborhood, a state, a town, and that really doesn't happen anymore. And so it's odd how people cling to this kind of archaic philosophy.
And something that would really help with gun control would be, I've said this, but background checks, because from 1998 to 2008, with all the background checks that have been enforced, only 1% of people who were buying a gun with background checks got denied. And clearly that number of denied percentages with background checks needs to go up because of the ridiculous epidemic of gun violence in the United States.
And I think also part of the problem is people are buying guns, but the sellers don't necessarily know why they are buying it. Is it to protect their home? Is it because they are a hunter, or is it because they want to participate in domestic violence, whether it's within other people and or themselves? So I think that also goes back to background checks and as well head injuries, which seem to be a big part of
Well, you
this.
bring us back to our topic that TJ brought up a little while ago, that, how does the NFL make itself safer? But a question that I have to you guys is, how does the NFL make itself safer without penalizing every hit?
It can't. They really can't. They're going to make it safer. They're going to have to drastically change it, like doing this kickoff thing when they put the ball on the 30-yard line. It's 4th and 15. You either punt it or go for it. And that would sort of get rid of the head injuries on kickoffs, but that's not really going to help make the NFL safer. It's just going to stop these terrible concussions. And I think it would change the game too much. Kickoffs are fun to watch. It's like when Devin McCourty had his huge 104-yard kickoff return against the Jets. You wouldn't have seen that. Would have been the excitement. Stadium wouldn't have gone wild. Everyone wouldn't have jumped up out of their seats and yelling. So you would lose the excitement.
If I'm Roger Goodell, the thing that I take out of the game is chop blocks. You just look. At this point, it's one of the biggest injury causers, other than what hits to the head were before they got rid of that. You just look, every time that someone gets their legs taken out from under them, it's a bigger chance of injury. Look at Brian Cushing earlier in the year. Taking the chop block in one of the first few games, and he's gone for the season. It's been one of the biggest injury causers in the past few years, and the NFL needs to recognize it.
And this may sound jaded, but the NFL players are getting paid millions of dollars. When you're getting paid that much money, you have to weigh your risks. You have to weigh. Honestly, Roger Goodell should be protecting these players like he is, but when you're getting paid this much money, I think you have to weigh your risks.
And I think the NFL, they need to take more time. They need to examine examples of hits that have led to head injuries. And then I think they do need to crack down. I think they do need more suspensions, even if a player doesn't get hurt, but to set an example, this is unacceptable, this needs to stop, and you will be penalized for this.
But
Carter,
the thing is, when you look at, and like you guys were saying, we're looking at kickoffs and may take those away. Look at shot blocking, another big injury factor. Take that away. When you're talking about penalizing for specific things that go on in the game that lead to injuries, eventually you're just going to work on down the ladder. It seems like our tolerance for the amount of injuries in a football game is decreasing, and I think rightfully. And I think that if we continue to remove the most dangerous aspects of football, we're not going to have anything left by the time we're done, because football is inherently a dangerous, dangerous game. And if we're going to take away all the dangerous aspects of football, it's going to be gone. And so it's really tricky to just say, well, we're going to penalize these specific hits, because there is always another hit that's going to look worse once that hit is removed.
All right, Carter, we're going to move on to the NBA here, as there's been a bit of a question going around lately over who's better, the Knicks or the Nets? What's your thoughts on who's the best team in New York?
Well, I was skeptical about both teams coming into the season. When you deal with the New York market, especially in the NBA, there's a tendency to overhype ball clubs. Right now, that's not happening. It was not overhype. It looks like right now the New York Knicks are one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference. I think they're the best team in the city. I don't know if they're as good as the Heat, although they really just are very good right now. We'll see what happens come playoff time with all of these players on the Knicks. But I think the key thing about the Knicks and what sets them apart from not only the other teams in the NBA right now, but the underperforming teams of the past, is that they're making the extra pass when they have the ball on the offensive end. They're able to say, well, Carmelo Anthony's our guy. He's our scorer. But we're going to be able to pass the ball to other people. And even without Amari Stoudemire playing, he's hurt, he's out. And with Carmelo Anthony not playing when they demolished the Miami Heat in Florida, the Knicks were able to get other people involved. Rasheed Wallace has had an incredible season. Raymond Felton stepped up big. Carmelo Anthony was out. Steve Novak always be available for a three-point shot. I think that if the Knicks can keep up this balanced attack and if they stay healthy, they're the best team in New York, and they can contend for the title.
That does reflect.
And Carter, do you think with Brooklyn coming into New York the way that they did, there were a lot of fans who were perhaps Knicks fans but are now Net fans because they're better when they were in New Jersey? It's almost like, you're the coolest kid in school, and then this kid from, England moves, and then to your school, and then everyone's, talking to him. It's kind of like that. So do you think that the Knicks were, say, a little bit jealous of the Nets getting more fans for it, and that motivated them to do better?
Well, I think the Knicks are still the more popular team in New York. They've got all that following from being in there for so long. But you're right. I think that the fact that a new team came into their city and said, we're going to try and be the new heart and soul of New York, I think that motivated the Knicks, because originally they were a very overrated franchise for these past 10, 15 years. They were able to sell a ton of tickets at Madison Square Garden anyway, and they had the entire largest city in the country on their side. And now that isn't a given, I think that it's pushed the Knicks a little bit. Probably not as much as they got them to this point. I think that they're just very talented. But I think that it definitely has something to do with it.
And what you said about the Knicks offense and their ability to score and pass the ball does reflect, as they have the second highest offensive efficiency rating in the NBA. And in addition to that, they've been doing so well that you hear of talk about Amari Stoudemire coming off the bench when he gets back. A year ago, Amari Stoudemire coming off the bench would have sounded preposterous.
Yeah, I think that is a really good sign for the New York Knicks. The fact that the guy that they brought over to rekindle their struggling franchise is now expendable on offense is really good news. The fact that Rasheed Wallace is playing the way he is right now is incredible for the Knicks. And Amari Stoudemire, it's going to be tricky once he gets back to see where he fits into that offense, because Amari Stoudemire is not going to want to be playing off the bench, especially the way the Knicks brought him over to New York.
Yeah.
But if they can add that one more offensive weapon, and when there's bound to be another injury at some point later, when that occurs, then Stoudemire can step in. The Knicks are loaded right now if you look at it that way.
All right, Carter.